I'm not here to hype the newest shiny instrument or tell you it will magically turn you into a professional saxophonist. What I want to do is walk you through what it actually feels like to own a Selmer SAS511 intermediate alto saxophone, why it might be the right fit for you, and where it could leave you wishing you'd spent a little more time looking around. Link is in the description if you want to check the product details on Amazon. The decision to spend a few $1,000s on a sax isn't one to take lightly, especially when you've probably tried a few student models and felt the limitations of cheap keywork or thin tone holes. In the next few minutes, I'll break down the day-to-day experience, the hidden trade-offs, and the real value you get beyond the glossy specs. First, let's talk about the kind of player who typically lands on the SAS511. You're probably past the beginner stage. Maybe you've been playing for a year or two, have a decent grasp of basic technique, and you're looking for an instrument that can keep up when you start tackling intermediate repertoire, jazz standards, or even your first solo gigs. If you're still stuck on a plastic-bodied student sax, or you own a cheap metal instrument that feels floppy, the SAS511 is positioned as the next logical step. Conversely, if you're a total newbie who hasn't yet mastered breath control or finger coordination, this sax could feel overwhelming, both in price and in the level of response you're expected to extract from it. One of the first things you notice when you open the case is the backpack-style design with ribbed construction. It's not just a cosmetic choice. The ribs add a bit of structural rigidity, which translates to a sturdier feel when you're lugging it to a school band, a rehearsal, or a weekend gig. I've taken it on a 3-day regional camp, and the case held up without any denting or cracked corners. That durability is a practical strength because it protects the instrument's delicate keywork and pads during travel, something many intermediate players underestimate until they've had a bad experience with a flimsy gig bag. Speaking of pads, Selmer equips the SAS511 with Pisoni Pro Pads. These are a step up from the standard soft felt pads you find on lower-priced models. In my testing, the Pro Pads gave a tighter seal around the tone holes, which means fewer air leaks when you're playing in the lower register. The result is a more consistent tone, especially when you're doing long phrases that demand steady breath support. For a student transitioning into jazz improvisation, that consistency can be a lifesaver because it lets you focus on phrasing rather than fighting the instrument for a clear note. The thumb rest is adjustable, and that might sound like a tiny detail, but it matters when you're spending several hours a day practicing. I have relatively short fingers, and being able to slide the thumb rest down a notch reduced the strain on my left hand during extended scale work. The adjustability also accommodates players with larger hands who might otherwise find the default position too cramped. That little piece of ergonomic thought is a practical advantage that shows Selmer considered a range of body types, not just an average. Now let's get into the sound. The SAS511 is an EB alto sax, and the bore size is tuned to give a warm, rounded tone that sits nicely in both classical ensembles and small jazz combos. I tried it in a concert band setting, and the instrument blended well without overpowering the section. Yet when I stepped up to a small jazz combo and pushed the dynamics, it could produce a bright, cutting edge that didn't sound harsh. This flexibility is something you'll appreciate if you're still figuring out which musical direction you want to pursue. It's not a one-track instrument that forces you into a specific genre. However, no sax is without its quirks. One practical weakness I noticed is the key action weight. Compared to a high-end professional Selmer model, the SAS511 feels a bit heavier on the left-hand side, particularly around the high E and high F keys. This isn't a deal-breaker, but if you have a tendency toward hand fatigue or you plan to play marathon sessions, you might need to build a bit more strength into those finger muscles. The extra weight comes from the robust brass construction, which also contributes to the instrument's resonant depth, so it's a trade-off you have to weigh. Another point worth mentioning is the finish black nickel. The striking, and it does a decent job of hiding fingerprints and minor scratches. Yet, because it's a darker surface, any smudges are more noticeable under stage lighting, so you'll want to keep a polishing cloth handy if you're performing under bright spotlights. This is a minor maintenance consideration, but it's something that pops up in real-world use, especially for gig-going players who want to look polished. Let's address the price-to-value equation. The SAS511 sits in the intermediate price band, roughly a few $1,000s. When